Custom script extensions are an awesome way to get your virtual machines configured automatically and consistently, especially when you're using infrastructure as code to deploy them. Just don't store those scripts in a public GitHub repo. Let's dive into the documentation and discuss why not and what we should do instead, and then ultimately into a demo and see how to do it. What I just wanted to call out here is that even in the example documentation for the file URI where we're going to download our script from, Microsoft have used the example of a GitHub repository. And that's all well and good. It's really nice and easy to get up and running with a public GitHub repository, but the problem is if we're storing any sensitive information in our script, and of course with all best intentions we usually don't, and we don't include access keys and passwords and so forth, but sometimes you start to include things that perhaps borderline. So let's say we're including configurations like antivirus exceptions or including installations of tooling or other software, then we're starting to include information that a bad actor might be able to use in the first instance for reconnaissance, but potentially mount a supply chain attack if one of those tools ends up having a vulnerability. So what do we do instead? If you've watched my channel before, it's probably no surprise to you that we can use a blob storage account, and I'm going to suggest that instead of using the storage account key, we're going to use a managed identity. Let's jump over into the portal and into VS Code and have a look how to do that. So here we are over in Microsoft Azure. I've just very quickly wanted to show you the environment where we're going to deploy our virtual machine and of course our custom script extension. So here we are on a spoke network. The spoke network is paired to a hub network, which is probably not important. So I'm just going to show you the subnets here on the spoke network. We're going to deploy onto this IIS spoke. It's going to be an IIS machine. So in our custom script extension, we're going to deploy a web server amongst a couple of other things. The other thing I've got here is the storage account, and on that storage account there, I've created a container called CSE for custom script extension, and I've dropped this script in here, Windows Server 2022 IIS, it's version 3. Okay, hopefully that's all clear. The other thing while we're here at this blob, as it were, I've grabbed this URL here, which I'll show you in the code and where I've dropped it, but that's the URL for where I'm going to download my script extension. If we dive over into the code, I'll try and walk through it, and we might dive back and forth into the portal if needs be. Here's my script. So I'm going to deploy and allow ICMP v4 firewall rule, so allow ping, disable Internet Explorer, set the time zone to GMT. I think Azure Virtual Machines are UTC out of the box. Set the culture and the system locale. I'm also going to deploy a whole bunch of roles that the server needs, including web server and a bunch of other stuff to support the specific web components. So that's that. Now we're going to use Bicep to automate our deployment end to end here. So I typically, this is not a video about Bicep, so I'm trying not to go into detail here, but I generally deploy my code with the main Bicep file and call a bunch of other modules because I usually am deploying more than just the virtual machine. For example, here you can see that I typically would deploy a backup schedule with my virtual machine, just as an example. The key thing on this main Bicep page here is that I'm feeding in the URL that I got from the blob, and I'm also feeding in the name of the storage account and the resource group name of the storage account, and this will hopefully become clear later. But the main Bicep file ultimately calls the module for the resource group, so it's creating a resource group, and then it calls the module for the virtual machine that I'm going to deploy. And that module here is called VMIS no domain join. That's because oftentimes now I deploy virtual machines that Entra ID joined or Azure ID joined. So this is the module here, and we're starting to get to the, I guess, the magic or how it actually works. So you can see I've got those storage account details, and if I scroll on down to the virtual machine and then just after that, so the key here with the virtual machine is that I'm enabling the system assigned managed identity. So I've got identity type system assigned. That's going to be required so that I can give the virtual machine access to the storage account. And then once the virtual machine's deployed, I need to do a role assignment. So it's key that this role assignment happens before the custom script extension. And you can see also this role assignment, I'm actually calling another module to make this role assignment. And the reason for that is the storage account is in a different resource group than my virtual machine, which I think would be a typical deployment. So I'll jump over to that module, which is just this one here, role assignment. And what we need here is the storage account name and the details of the virtual machine. We're just going to call out these resources that already exist so we can use their identifier numbers. And then this is sort of where it gets interesting. I think this is what you need for the role assignment. Is this GUID relates to the Azure built-in roles, and the Azure built-in role in this case is blob data reader. And you'll see that when we actually do the deployment, I'll show you that role's been assigned. That is also an existing resource. We have deployed it into our Azure tenancy, but it just exists in the back end. So just understand that. So the only thing we're actually deploying in this module here is the role assignment. The name is a little bit by the by, but I just like to create a GUID which will make a consistent name every time, and it's a combination of the inputs. The scope here is where the role is being assigned. So we're assigning a role to the storage account. And then for the properties, you've got the principal ID, that is the managed identity or user assigned identity that is actually getting the role. So in this case, it's the virtual machine's managed identity that is getting the role on the storage account, and the role that is getting defined where it says role definition ID is the blob reader. So once that has been deployed, the deployment then carries on back in the virtual machine. You can see the next thing, I've got custom script extension, and the key here is that this depends on the storage role assignment module. There's a few other things. I think most of this is available in the documentation, but just some things I wanted to call out is that these settings here, file URIs and command to execute, could just be, they could actually live, and quite commonly live, in the settings section here. Now, to use managed identity of a system assigned identity type, you just need to put managed identity and then no actual settings, and it will know to use the system assigned identity. If you're using a user assigned identity, then you need to add in here client ID or object ID. So it's not the case for us. But what is key is this, even though you're not passing any sensitive information because we're using system assigned identity, this needs to be in the protected settings area or it won't work. And I don't think that's actually that clear if I just jump back to the documentation here. It just shows that those settings all go together. And if you've previously had those settings working in the settings section, then I don't think that's clear. So I wanted to call that out. That must be in the protected settings area. So you might as well just put them all in the protected settings area, and thereby also protecting your script URI. Finally, the command to execute here is obviously I'm running PowerShell, I'm setting the execution policy to unrestricted, and this is just a fancy way of me breaking down the custom script URI so that I can take basically the last thing after the slash, which is the PowerShell script. Okay, so that should be everything we need to understand. Now I'll go back to my main file and set up a couple of the parameters, and we'll just go ahead and do a deployment. I think I've already set them here. So this is going to be number 3. We haven't already deployed number 3. So if I do a new AZ subscription deployment, and that all looks good to me, I'll just go ahead and let that run. Awesome, so through the magic of editing, that 10 minutes took only a few seconds, and our virtual machine looks like it's all deployed successfully here. Let's jump over into the portal and then to the virtual machine and make sure what we've expected to happen has happened. So here we are in VS Code, and it looks like the same as our editor, no surprise, so the deployment looks successful. We've got our storage account here, and if we jump into the storage account and have a look at the role assignment, which is, I guess, the key to all this, we should be able to see that. Okay, so here under role assignments, if I scroll on down, you can see under storage blob data reader, you can see my earlier one that I was playing with, number 1, and the VM that we've just deployed here, number 3, and finally VM number 3 up and running. So let's jump over into my remote desktop manager and see if we can connect to it via Azure Bastion. And hopefully we've got our roles installed. Cool. Okay, I can just see straight here from the server manager that my IE enhanced security configuration is turned off. Also, I can see that the file storage services and the IIS roles that were both part of my script have been deployed. And finally, if I go down to my date and time here, I should be able to see that I am on GMT, and if that's all good, then I think and it certainly is, so I think we're good to go. Hopefully that's helped someone out there today. I know that I had a little bit of trouble getting the managed identity to work as expected in the protected settings. Until next time, have a good one.